Story 1. I started my first period at midnight when I had just turned 11. I bled heavily and didn't know what was going on. My mom tossed a pad at me and told me to put it on before going back to bed. There was no comfort, no talk, just the usual coldness. I felt scared, sad, confused, angry, and ashamed. Story 2. I am still coming of age. I feel like I have lived 4 distinct lives. I have lost all cohesion. Everything and nothing has changed. It is a constant push and pull. Life is a dynamic roller coaster. Story 3. My coming of age was at 19 when I returned home after my first year of college and saw my family from a new perspective. My barely functional father was drowning himself in cheap alcohol. My depressed mother was having an affair, and my sisters craved nothing more than to escape by whatever means necessary. I realized that I was very lucky to be getting away myself and that I had choices to make to avoid repeating the misery I had escaped. Story 4. My first job as a waitress was at a company party for 1,000 people when I was 19. After dancing and drinking all night, one of the guests had a massive heart attack and died on the dance floor. I was clearing tables when I heard people performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation and a woman crying and screaming. Then the emergency medical technicians and police arrived. He was pronounced dead and covered with a green plastic sheet. They had to wait for the coroner before moving him, and it seemed like everyone left from my perspective. It felt like ages until he was taken away, and I thought he was just alone on the dance floor, covered with a tarp. Kinda messed me up for a while. Story 5. God. I was so insecure about developing later than my friends. I stuffed my bra with socks at 13 and thought I was fooling everyone. Looking back, all that stress about timing was such a waste. Nobody cares about that now. We're all just trying to figure out taxes and adulthood. Story 6. Being 18 in the army and deployed to Macedonia, then into Kosovo during the Kosovo crisis. To this day, I try not to use the word hate. During my 2 tours, I witnessed the results of real hatred, and it disgusted me. Story 7. I feel like it was when the boys on the school bus showed me inappropriate content. I realized there was a lot more that I didn't yet understand, and the world was way bigger than my limited understanding. I still have that feeling from time to time, but it isn't triggered by inappropriate content anymore. Story 8. A big turning point for me was at the age of 11. Before that, it felt like every kid around me basically got along. But for some reason, at that age, people split into cliques. People I considered longtime friends suddenly wanted nothing to do with me. People who just days before loved the same things as me now called them childish. It was a big eye-opener about life and the people who were my true friends. Story 9. I think my coming of age was when I was put in jail and was not able to bond out. The only time before that, I just spent the night and woke up and walked out of there. The second time was honestly traumatic and eye-opening. I couldn't believe that I was in there, and I wasn't getting out anytime soon. Story 10. Coming home to my dad sitting on the floor crying after my mom left him when I was working 2 jobs at 19 and pretending to go to community college while still living at home. He clearly was so distraught and finally had to tell me that he didn't know if he could make rent next month because she was contributing 30% normally, and that I probably had to move out. It has always left me with the realization that everything can change in an instant out of nowhere. So my guard is always up and I don't believe in true bonding with people now. It ended up being for the best, though. My parents are both much happier now and I got to move to a city I love and have my own place now where I can just be alone and enjoy my me time and independence. It's not a Hollywood ending, and I still have hopefully many years on this earth. But those first few years trying to navigate poverty and homelessness did traumatize me a bit, even if it ended up working out for the best. Story 11. I went home for spring break and never went back to high school. That was my junior year. Coronavirus took my 2 proms, graduation, and whatever else my coming of age should have looked like. Instead, I worked the night shift at a dairy farm for a year and a half, slept through every online class I had, got transferred to an online school, and eventually graduated with a group of strangers in 2021. Meanwhile, my family crumbled around me due to politics. I started seeing the worst therapist imaginable, the man I saw as my second father died, and fast forward 5 years, I am witnessing my country suffer under the same man who ended my childhood and ruined my family. Truthfully, I haven't come of age yet. I am 21 years old, estranged from my family, addicted to 1,000 things, with an online job and a mostly written fantasy book I just can't get around to publishing for some reason. I do love my girlfriend, though. Story 12. When I realized that even the adults were making things up as they went along, I wished I had made things up much earlier. Story 13. I was in a relationship. It was the first time I fell in love. He ghosted me one day, blocked me everywhere, and I could never contact him. I realized that he had left me with no explanation or reason. He just disappeared. Couldn't take the pain, the heartbreak, coupled with an abusive father and a depressed and regressive mother, made my life unbearable as a 14-year-old. I decided to end it one day and cut myself everywhere. I slept in a black sweatshirt and jeans, in black bed sheets and covers so the blood wouldn't be seen. I thought I would bleed to death. I woke up a couple of hours later, very dizzy and hungry, and in pain that I was still alive. That was the first time I accepted and saw my life as it is. In my second coming of age, I understood my mother. She was a victim of sexual assault in her childhood. She grew up, but her family couldn't afford her education. However, she was very beautiful, so she married my father for financial security. He abused her and us. Her mother and sister encouraged her to stay with him despite the abuse so he could pay for my education and meet the financial needs of my sibling and me. She thought it was better to be with an abuser than to be homeless and fall into the hands of a ruthless world. I feel sympathy for my mother, but wish she could have taken more responsibility for her life and our lives. She has remained depressed and non-functional for most of our lives, and I doubt she has processed any of it. She will probably die as miserable as she is. There is nothing I can do about it. Story 14. Last year, all my best friends at the time moved away and left me. Since then, I've learned that there are many more good people out there than those I had confined myself to. Since then, I've become much more sociable and accepting as a human being. Story 15. Life always kind of felt challenging, and it wasn't even that bad. My father has bipolar disorder and was abusive. There wasn't enough money because he was unmotivated and selfish, but we lived in a good area thanks to a family member. Story 16. I think the tough parts of teasing and fights have gone online. There are different economic and career challenges, but opportunity remains. Story 17. Mine started young. I grew up in a wealthy bedroom community on the outermost edge of Detroit. There was a lot of privilege and little responsibility. Drugs, sex, and petty crimes started the summer after 9th grade. I was 14 because I had skipped a year. I came from a relatively poor household. My grandmother raised 3 kids on around $40,000 a year, and it makes a child willing to try harder to gain acceptance when their peers have so much more than they do. Story 18. In high school, I realized that I was just unattractive enough to be a romantic failure, and that was exactly what happened. The world is cruel to people who do not fit the societal norm. Story 19. I think it was when I moved out from my parents and started taking responsibility for myself, especially in everyday tasks. Story 20. At age 14, I felt a wide range of revelations almost all at once or perhaps over a week. The following 5 years made me cynical, the 5 after that made me observant, and the years that followed made me empathetic. Story 21. My life has been a series of realizations that had a greater impact than anything that happened when I was a young adult. The whole concept of coming of age seems to be based around the idea that it only happens once. Story 22. I feel like I wasted the first 18 years of my life. I always obeyed my parents, avoided anything dangerous or thrilling, and never learned any fun real-life skills. Sure, I picked up some practical skills like plumbing, electrical work, carpentry, and programming, but I never learned to play an instrument or pursue anything I enjoyed. Worst of all, I spent my time studying subjects I hated for an uncertain future. Meanwhile, my siblings and cousins were and are living their lives, disobeying their parents, driving cars, smoking, vaping, and even ending up in hospitals, while I only sat beside them. They were learning so-called useless, but fun skills like playing guitar or skating. They had exciting, rebellious friends, while my friends, though nice, are dull cowards who never encouraged me to try anything new. To top it off, I have barely seen the world. I have only been outside my country for a total of 1 month, excluding the first 4 years of my life, and outside my region for just 6 months, mostly with my grandmother taking care of her in her travels. Now, I feel like I have wasted so much time. And what is next? College, then work, and then marriage. I will not have any real free time until I am 65, when the government forces me to retire. Story 23. My coming of age was in my early teens. I got my driving license early and lied about my age to get a job. The lesson I learned was that nobody is going to take care of you. That has never changed after many decades. Story 24. My coming of age was from 19 to now. I'm 22 now. The last couple of years felt like I just woke up from a dream, and now I'm actually coherent. My friends and I went on wild adventures, and through that I found myself. Story 25. Never came of age, but I realized that I see money differently now after I became an adult. At 20, I began to manage my finances and started investing. I am now relatively frugal compared to my late teens. Story 26. Coming of age felt like unlocking a new level in a video game, only to realize it is just taxes and back pain. Story 27. 17 when I got my driver's license. At the same time, I hit a massive growth spurt and went from about 5 feet 4 inches to about 6 feet. Before I got a license, I really couldn't do anything. All my friends had their licenses and would drive like crazy. It was hilarious thinking about how misguided my parents were in believing I was the unsafe one. For my parents, not needing to drop me off for every practice, event, or whatever was huge too. I don't know why they waited nearly 2 years for me to get my license. Of course, as soon as I got it, I was pulled over for something silly and had to go to traffic court and school at the juvenile facility. I had the pleasure of being there for turning right on red, where there was a no turn on red sign at midnight. Everyone else caused accidents, drove under the influence, or were driving without a license, that kind of stuff. Still, I met lots of cool people though. Story 28. I thought becoming an adult meant having all the answers. Turns out, it just means searching for everything online and pretending you know what you are doing. Story 29. It has been a slow process over many years, but the starting point I remember clearly is right after my parents dropped me off at university. I turned around and saw them walking back to the car and had this sudden realization that I was now on my own and had to figure out my own destiny going forward. I had just turned 18 the previous month. The first 3 months were a rough adjustment, but by the end of my first year, I felt fully independent. I lived with my parents the first summer, then moved into my own place after that. Story 30. My parents separated when I was 7, and I was the only one trying to keep my brother in a positive mindset for the first 3 to 4 years after that. I continued this despite becoming his safe person to express his hurt. It was difficult. From that point on, I made it a priority to see the negative aspects of my parents objectively and to learn how to do the opposite as a father and as a romantic partner to my wife. Story 31. My coming of age was in the 1980s, and it was a magical time. I loved everything about it. By far the best time of my life. If I could go back, I wouldn't hesitate for a single second. Story 32. I missed every rite of passage. Some were celebrations I was unable to attend. Most were milestones that were not even on my road. Story 33. I got a car that used to be my older brother's. He crashed it and my grandpa fixed it up. My mom immediately gave it to my cousin because I didn't have a license yet, and she could drive me to school. Then my parents never let me drive or take my test to get my license because I didn't have enough experience. Eventually, I bought my own car and my parents sold my first car, which I never got to drive, to their neighbor. I didn't even get the money from that sale. Story 34. When I realized I could decide how to live my life all by myself, it was on me. It was freeing, one of the best possible feelings. Freedom comes with uncertainty, though. I understood why so many people, even close friends of mine, couldn't find the strength necessary to make that kind of choice. Of course, some people are just obliged to do certain things. I am fortunate because, in my situation, I could decide without any burdens on me. A few years have passed, and I am still on the trail of that decision, excited to see where this journey may take me. What I know is that, Since then, I have lived much more than before. Story 35. It is really strange because we can do some things at 16 and some others at 18, but the government does not recognize you as your own independent adult until 25. Your parents are still expected to support you until then, so you do not really qualify for any government support. Turning 25 and being able to access those supports is what I genuinely consider my coming of age. Nothing changed at 16, and nothing changed at 18. At 25, I moved out, started university, relocated to a new city, and began my life. Story 36. My first experience by my two close friends when I was 15. I am male, they are female. Things got real after that. We are all still friends about 25 years later. Story 37. I seriously think I was a cliché story. My parents were divorced before I was 4. We lived with my grandparents. My mother became a working woman and my father tried his best. Eventually, they both remarried and I got siblings. My teenage years happened. Puberty was challenging. I was the pop culture guy but had connections with all the clichés without belonging to anything, playing my hand in clubs and sports. I dated, discovered intimacy, and went to college where things were just different. Life happened, people passed away, and life moved forward many times in ways I could not have imagined, both good and bad. Story 38. Coming of age was a mix of confusion and excitement. I have since become more comfortable with who I am, but growth is ongoing. Story 39. January 5th, 2018. It was a relentless heartbreak I still deal with. The things they said before saying goodbye and the way she explained that her family was laughing at me because I went out of my way to try to make things right and then the best they could be. I was ready to change because I wasn't the best, and it's evident I meant it because I did change with or without her and her family. I've never been the same. This to me is equivalent to what before Christ and Anno Domini is. I have come a long way. There's my vendetta. There's my closure. Story 40. I was severely depressed to the point of not wanting to continue anymore right when I hit 18 during the year of the COVID-19 pandemic. By the age of 21, I had traveled solo to other countries, having never traveled before I turned 18, and I had a wonderful group of friends. However, the real coming-of-age moment occurred when I realized at 22 that I am pursuing my master's degree, and I am not afraid of falling back into depression. I always thought that traveling and having friends nearby were merely distractions from my depression, but in reality, they helped me manage it. I am no longer scared that I have more work, fewer friends, and that I am across the country from anyone I know. I am doing okay. It just takes time. Story 41, pretty good awful, but apparently because my brain does not do all the things it is supposed to, and it really was not supposed to be that hard. Whoops. Story 42. I was 17. It was 2020. School had just announced that it was going to close for 2 weeks. I spent those 2 weeks working at my part-time job and at my girlfriend's house. I just felt like a kid up until that point. Then I woke up one morning to a message from my dad, saying something along the lines of, "I cut the end of my finger off. I need you to come help me prepare the planter." My parents were divorced my whole life. I was going to school and I was living with my mom for most of the time. She worked at a local hospital. I sometimes helped my dad on his farm, but school got in the way a lot, and my mom moved us 30 minutes away. In that week, I did all the work to the planter, applied for college, moved out of my mom's house into my dad's, and my girlfriend moved into his house with me. I felt like everything I did from that point on had to be from an adult's perspective. I am now 22, turning 23 later this year, and I feel like I should be getting close to my 30s. Story 43. At 14 to 15, I was an arrogant, annoying but troubled teenager. I was sent to a psychiatrist by an annoyed but anxious father. He had literally learned from Sigmund Freud himself and was 84. I suspected he was senile, and I was sent to a mental institution. After a few months, I punched out my new hospital psychiatrist and was discharged. My father came to pick me up and take me back, and I told him I no longer lived with him but with my mother, who had been divorced for 10 years. She was slightly taken aback, but my little bag of clothes and I were dropped off at her place. A few months later, I walked out of school between 2 classes and never went back. After a bit, I took charge of my own education. Eventually, I found an alternative to high school graduation in the technical system, commuting over 100 kilometers a day to attend, and got into a university. In the middle of this, I came out as gay to people I knew. It was a different place back then and would have been dangerous to do in my small town. My mother and stepfather packed my stuff into a small trailer, took me to my new student shared house in the city, and left me there to live my adult life. My first year at university was so good. These were powerful and turbulent years for me. I was lucky to have a somewhat sane background in a decent place to live them out in. I was insanely strong-willed and stubborn, bizarrely charismatic in many people's eyes, and while not an awful person, I was too blind and self-centered to care about those around me in the way I might have in later life. Story 44. I remember being 17 and just thinking to hold on to this moment. 17 feels amazing. 17 is your number. 17 is it. I remember truly being in the moment. Story 45. Everyone was over racism and just wanted to use common sense and be colorblind. Obama won, and the Republicans were genuinely happy about making history with the first black president and what that showed about us as a nation, even though they disagreed with him. Then the Democrats became overly focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion and a victim mindset, making everything about race, and everything went sour. Now we are much more racist than we were then. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.